We are live. You are being recorded with us. This is Yes, California. We had a series of recall debates with different candidates who declared. About 25 to 30% of them participated in the Yes, California debates. We recently saw a San Diego Union Tribune poll of candidates, which showed 2/3 of all candidates who appeared in any traction on polling participated in Yes, California debates for the recall election. And candidates who participated in the Yes, California recall debates did better than those candidates who refused to be part of those debates, coincidentally. With us today, we're continuing that series, but now we're not doing any more debates. We're doing one-on-one interviews so that you can get an in-depth look at all of the people running to be the leader of the world's fifth largest economy and possibly 40 million people in about the next few days. Today, we have Professor James Hanink. James is running for governor of California. He is a professor. He's been around in California, and he's a critical thinker. Thank you for being here today, Professor.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, Marcus, and let me say I very much appreciate the service that you provided.
We love hearing that. We love that. We really prided ourselves on being able to provide information about the candidates to the voters that no one else is doing, and it's been a true honor to be able to do that. Well, let's get right to it. Professor Hanink, usually I ask the candidates kind of a mental exercise to get us in the game. Let's say that you and I are in a cigar store, and I have a cigar in my hand, and I'm at the register about ready to buy it and walk away. And you're about ready to buy a cigar, and you notice that it's going to take me about a minute and a half to wrap up my transaction and get out of that store, and I have nowhere to go but listen to you. What would you say to me in a minute and a half, total random stranger, to let me know that you're running for governor and why I should consider you?
I think I'd say, Marcus, that I myself smoke cigars, and I wouldn't do it if I didn't have tendinitis. But once you've got tendinitis, you need to take drastic measures. And that might lead to a discussion of, well, good junk food. And I must confess as well that I'm not wholly free from the clutches of junk food. My besetting vice is Cheetos. And I don't mind if they're puffy, but I prefer them crispy. And then you look at me and you say, this guy is worth more than a minute. This guy's worth 2 minutes. And then I'll say to you, Marcus, speaking of junk food, we suffer from a junk food habit, but we also suffer from a junk politics habit. And one of the forms that junk politics takes is that unlike Cheetos, it costs lots and lots and lots of money. And then I'd say, as I noticed your interest was rising, I'd say, take this fellow Newsom, for example. According to the Los Angeles Times, just a week or so ago, well, get this in the middle of the screen, he's banking on cash to hold on to power. And he spent, given that this was about a week ago, he spent about $38 million. $38 million. And one of his big backers of late is a fellow named Reed Hastings. And Reed is backing him because he wants to get Netflix some special coverage, some special breaks. Reed made the mistake of backing the wrong horse the last time around. And now you're really looking at me. You're really looking at me. And first of all, you slip into your own agenda. You say, you know any place where you can get a good 25-cent cigar? And I say, no. That's history. That's history, long ago history. And then I'll continue with my point that, politics that's run by money is really junk politics. And the great bulk of the money is spent on ads. And most of the ads are junk ads. And one of the things, Marcus, that I haven't been able to figure out is why, given the character of junk politics. People keep giving money to the folks who are dishing out junk politics via junky ads. And then if you say something like, well, can you give me some personal experience wherever you are? And then I say, well, yeah, I can give you some experience. Being new to this, my good friend, being new to this, I never ran an ad until maybe 10 days ago. And lo and behold, the ad already in 10 days has gotten 6,100 viewers. And all of this for $200. So I'm thinking that's really good. And you might say, so you appreciate ads, do you? What were you talking about money being wasted on ads? See what that's done for you? I'd say, no, Marcus, it didn't work out the way I experienced it. And I'll give you the ad. It's not that long, but first of all, I'll tell you what the response to the ad was. The ad highlights my party, the American Solidarity Party. The response was 90% of the people responding said, I like Newsom, keep him. And maybe 10% said, no, 9% said, he's got to go. And then the other 90% piled on and said, you idiot. He's got to stay. Went back and forth. And you know what? There was a food fight, a political food fight. Back and forth. You think I want to read 6,123 back and forths? No, I don't. You might say, must have been a dumb ad to inspire something like that.
No, that actually sounds like a good ad. Controversy is your friend.
Well, not if the controversy takes the form of a food fight. I want to tell you what the ad said. It's not that long.
Can you post a link in the private chat and we'll show it to everybody?
Well, I can't tell you the truth. I mean, I'll just say go to my website and you'll be able to see it.
Okay.
This is short. It says, ballots are out. It's time to cast your vote for human life and human dignity. Vote for Dr. James G. Hanink for Governor of California, the American Solidarity Party candidate. For the second question on the recall ballot, whether or not you support the recall itself. All right, so that's a little introduction. We're trying to bring everyone in, right? And it continues. The American Solidarity Party seeks the common good. The party looks beyond the good of the wealthy few and beyond the good of a shifting majority. We seek the good of every human being from conception until natural death. We are pro-life for the whole of life. And then because common good, well, that's a tall order. I go on to say, and bear with me, gentle listeners and viewers, I go on to say, to advance the common good, we honor and promote solidarity. First measure of justice is how we treat the most vulnerable. Subsidiarity. Build from the grassroots up, from our local communities, and then, if necessary, to the county and state level. And third, economic democracy. Economic democracy. This is an aside, but I used to tell my students that democracy is one thing, but if you want to run for Senate, you got to have about $35 million to be even taken seriously. Who's got $35 million? So I say economic democracy. Well, what is that? It's the principle that we should organize for the widest ownership possible of homes, of land, of utilities, of the means of production, the means of communication, and last, number 4, and here's the end of the ad, the inviolability of conscience. Now, as I say, well, let's be more precise. Let's say 2/3 of the people had nothing to say about this. The only thing they had to say about it was no on the recall. And 30%, that gets us up to 95%, right, said yes on the recall. And did anybody address the content of the ad? One person said something very interesting. He said, oh, brother, throw a liberal out and let a commie in. Well, I'm the farthest thing in the world from that.
I mean, it almost sounds like you got attacked by bots. I'm sure that some of those people were real people, but generally, when you have such a plethora of comments and they're all saying one thing, almost like they're not interacting and they're just parroting, it's a lot of robot attacks. Now, we can't prove that, but if you can send me that link, this is how you can find Professor Hanink on Facebook. Go to facebook.com, Hanink for Gov. That's Hanink for Gov.
I think whoever put that up there, probably you and somebody else, but thank you.
Yeah, and then also if you want to go to James Hanink, that's jameshanink.com. You can look at the professor's site. Let's show you that website here real quick. And here we go. Here is Hanink for Governor, James Hanink. There's the website. Here's the home page. Become a volunteer.
You're a gracious host, Marcus. A gracious host indeed.
What does he stand
for? All the
for?
way down to the bottom, it'll have the link to the Facebook page.
Okay, Facebook.
Yep.
Here we go. We're going to the Facebook page. This is the Facebook page for Professor James Hanink.
Yep.
American Solidarity Party, sanctity of human life, necessity of social justice, conservation of the environment, promotion of peace. And is this, oh, hold on. Is this the video you're talking about right here?
No, keep going. There. Keep going. A little farther. No, up a little bit.
Is it this one?
I don't think so. It's further up. It's further up. Oh, keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going.
And that's it.
Well,
let's go to videos.
It's someplace else.
On your videos, you only have two. Is it one of these two?
No, it's separate. It's
well.
I'm sorry to have you off on a wild goose chase. However, it was our first Facebook ad.
Yeah, check out Facebook.
Being newcomers, it took us 10 days to get cleared.
That's usually how long it takes for everybody because Google likes to verify you, especially after the 2016 election. They've made it exceptionally difficult for people to become verified to post anything political. I'm surprised you even got through it all. Congratulations to you, sir.
Well, it could be bots, but they're highly personalized bots, and they like to fight with each other as they go.
Could be. I mean, so let's ask that question. Are you for the recall or are you against the recall?
Coming in, Marcus, or maybe I should say on the verge of coming in, I mostly thought, well, there's going to be a recall. And since there's going to be a recall, there's a chance to say something about the American Solidarity Party. And I thought to myself, since we're for ranked choice voting, we'll be able to say to people, look, vote whatever way you want, but on Part B, give us a look, right? But now, as the recall develops, it's more and more Newsom because there's more and more money being spent. And he's invited all the usual suspects to town, and he's also told his people just ignore Part B.
Right. I was going to ask you about that.
I'm thinking to myself, gee, we're not even going to get a chance to be somebody's second or third choice if Newsom has his way. So that was changing my thinking. But then I was thinking, well, what do I think about Newsom? And I want Newsom recalled. And I must say, I probably mostly want him recalled for reasons that most people don't have. But that's another reason to join the debate, because there are more reasons than maybe most people have to want him recalled.
So let's hear it. What are your reasons why Governor Newsom should be recalled that most of the people who back this effort are not saying?
All right. Well, I'm going to do some overlap.
Okay.
I understand that for most people, COVID is the single biggest issue. I think that Newsom should be recalled because during the height of the pandemic, and I'm not even sure we've come to the height of the pandemic, but what has been the height of the pandemic, he pretty much ignored people in care facilities. Now, our party's interested in the common good, and that includes the good of the weakest. And among the very weakest are people who are in care facilities, and they were pretty much ignored. There was article after article in the paper about how they were dying faster than any other group, and they kept on dying. At the same time, I think he was overreaching himself badly when he had the very sharp restrictions he had on churches. My parish church, St. John Chrysostom in Englewood, will hold 1,000 people. How many could go in? None. None. No one could go in at all. No, that's silly. That's foolish. And I think the reason why that came to be is because people, I think, not so much with the Republicans, but with the Democrats, those folks tend to think that, well, religion really doesn't mean that much anyway. It's a wholly private thing, and you can practice it in a wholly private way, and what do you need to go to church for? Well, that's the wrong view of religion, but I think that a certain misunderstanding of religion led them to have a cavalier attitude towards the restrictions in church. Next thing coming up. Newsom, and now a few more people probably agree with me about this. Newsom is the governor of the main state on the Pacific Rim, which means he's interested in China. Of course, what are his interests in China mostly about? Economics. Well, I guess that's one thing that I say communism and capitalism in their purer forms have in common. They have a position that I call economism. You want to look at anything? Look at it from an economic perspective. So that's the way that Newsom looks at what's going on in China. What I see when I look at China is an increasing violation of human rights. Most obvious is the Uyghurs, Muslims, who by the hundreds of thousands were detained in camps to be re-educated, which is a giveaway. And not only that, I'm a Roman Catholic, and Catholic churches have been closed down more and more and more. And you want religious education? Well, I guess that would be okay, but you have to be an adult before you can get that now in China. You have to be an adult, which probably means by that time you got a job that you don't want to lose. At any rate, one of the greatest things that parents can give to their children is their faith, but not in China. Now, Newsom occasionally nods in that direction, but that doesn't direct his approach to China. It should, on my view. Now, next we come to abortion, which he promotes. He actually promotes it. And next we come to euthanasia. In California, there are a couple states like this, but once again we take the lead in a way we shouldn't be taking the lead. We have something called a physician-assisted suicide. And most people who are gravely ill and often isolated, most people need more support from the community. They need real time with real people. Now, what do we say in California? Well, yeah, but here's a way you could take your own life. What you want to consider this, don't you? I mean, you're so sick, you want to think about killing yourself, don't you? And you can see the, what should I say, the heinousness of all of this and the transparent malice involved in it. When somebody does commit physician-assisted suicide, what's on the death certificate? Not suicide. That's how they died. They died because they ingested a drug provided by a physician, but that's not on the death certificate. It's whatever background disease they had. Well, this is rewriting the end of somebody's life. Now, last thing that I would want to remove Newsom for, and I spent 40 years in university education, is that we have two flagship universities, University of Berkeley and University of California, Berkeley, and University of California at San Francisco. Now, UC Berkeley does all sorts of things, and one of the things it does is it serves as the anchor and the base for something called the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. What does the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory do? Go to its website. Its chief function is the development of research on nuclear weapons. Its backup mission is watching over, they use the word minding the nuclear weapons stockpiles around the country. Now, you can hem and you can haw, but what that means is we're committed to a policy of mutual assured destruction. Who's we? State of California, that's for sure. How come? Because it's flagship university, and Berkeley's a bigger rep than in San Francisco, does what it does. I don't think that that's ever even occurred to Newsom to raise as a public issue. And lastly, UC San Francisco, along with University of Pittsburgh, the UC San Francisco is a research center for ongoing experimentation and investigations involving tissue taken from aborted babies. And pro-life groups have got the orders, the invoices that UC San Francisco has sent out in order to gather materials for research. And one of the intriguing things on the invoices is this. They want fresh specimens. You know how it is, if you're going to have a transplant of tissue, it's got to be fresh, which means they're working with designated abortionists to get the kind of human tissue from aborted babies for their research. I think Newsom, from what I can tell, he would approve of that and say, well, that's great. I think it's appalling. So for those reasons, I think I've got 5 there, I would want to recall Newsom anyway.
Okay, well, you heard it here. James Hanink does back the recall, but for his own set of issues he's pointing out. One is the tolerance for China, the unwillingness to point out their human rights abuses that are only increasing on a certain trajectory if we look at it at the long term. The support seemingly for abortion by California law, the support seemingly for suicide in California culture and law, the support seemingly for the Lawrence Livermore Lab and its nuclear stockpile, and the support for the University of California, San Francisco Medical Research Center using unborn tissue. What would you say is the top reason people should vote for you as governor? Why are you different? Obviously, you have your own set of reasons why you're backing the recall, but those are your reasons. What is it that you would do differently as governor that's not available to the voters to choose from in the other 45 candidates?
Well, each of those candidates comes from a center of strength, a certain vision, a certain perspective. I'm a philosopher. Most of what I've written is, well, material on philosophy, scholarly studies on philosophical questions. I've written a lot of other things too. I'm a blogger for something called the New Oxford Review.
I've heard of that.
And I do a video cast, a weekly video cast. But most of my work has been in mainstream academic philosophy. The kind of philosophy that Socrates said you shouldn't get paid for. You should do it just because you love to do it. But that was Socrates. The cost of living wasn't so high.
Right.
Now, what that means is, I think I have a comprehensive vision and understanding of what politics should be about. And because politics is about human beings, I think I have a comprehensive vision of what it is to be a human being. There's a fancy name for that. It's called philosophical anthropology. Not the kind of anthropology that does digs here, there, and the other place, but the kind of anthropology that systematically studies the human person and the human person's fundamental nature. Now, if you say, where did he get that stuff? Where's he coming from? Once upon a time, Aristotle wrote a book called The Politics. And before he wrote The Politics, he wrote a book called Ethics. And on the last page of the book called Ethics, last page, he says, a lot of this has been at the personal level, the individual level. You can't help but wonder what it would look like at the level of the city. And I'm working on that. He says it more formally. And now you go to the politics. And the first paragraph is short. Let me read it. Chapter 1 in Book 1. We see that every city-state is a community of some sort. And that every community is established for the sake of some good. And he doesn't say that the good is money. We see that the city-state is a community of some sort and that every community is established for the sake of some good. Why would he think that? He says this, for everyone performs every action for the sake of what he takes to be good. You're doing right now, Marcus, what you're doing because you think it's good to do it. If you didn't think it's good to do it, you wouldn't be doing it. So then he continues, clearly then, while every community aims at some good, the community that has the most authority of all, notice he doesn't say power, he says the most authority. The community that has the most authority of all and encompasses all the others aims highest, that is to say at the good which has the most authority of all. It's not a stockpile of nuclear weapons. This community is the one called a city-state. This is the political community. Now, there's tons packed into that, but I think somebody like Newsom, and I think the great majority of the Republican candidates as well, think of politics as a kind of, well, it's a social contract. And what you want to do is balance this interest off against that interest. And maybe what you want to do is neutralize the interests so that they're always in competition with each other. And that's not what politics is about. Politics is about promoting the highest good. The highest good of what? Of us, of human beings. Well, what is the good for human beings? It's not collecting the most stuff in the course of your life, right? It's not getting the most likes on your webpage. The good for human beings is the formation of community, and a community that brings them together so that they can work for the fundamental goods that lead to human flourishing. Now, if you have junk food politics, you can't talk that way. But unless we at least think that way, even if we can't talk that way, what we're going to have is what we've experienced, an ongoing power struggle and nothing more than that.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is that you bring a particular perspective and ability to provide mental inquiry.
And
into
because I have that perspective, I have the 5 complaints that I have registered about Newsom.
right. So because you've been specially academically trained to look at those deep issues and delve into them and to look at holistically what is it that's good, you can look at how does a society function, not just what the governor says, not just what the newspapers talk about, but holistically, how is California functioning? And then you can zero in on the particular issues you think are worst in order to make it a better functioning society. That is a unique perspective. I haven't heard any of the other candidates provide it, and they might not have the background to be able to analyze it in that way. If you were, what you've obviously heard a lot of the candidates running for office. What is the big mistake a lot of the candidates are making when they're saying, vote for me because I'll do X, Y, versus you can see past that. You can recognize that that's just gimmickry. That's a flash in the pan. That's just clickbait, as the kids say these days. And you can see past these gimmicks the other candidates are offering, and you're able to provide the real problem. I mean, what is it that other conservatives, I guess, or liberals are saying is the real problem with California, and how are they getting that wrong? And how do you actually identify the real problem and see past what they're missing?
All right, now as a professor, I'm sure that all of your listeners want to hear me say something in Latin. They might not admit it, but they want to hear me say something in Latin.
Okay.
So I'll say something in Latin. Quid recipitur. Whatever is received, quid recipitur, ad modum recipientis, according to the mode of the receiver, recipitur. Whatever is received according to the mode of the receiver. So, if you've been raised on junk food, what do you like? Healthy food?
No.
No, you don't like healthy food.
Right.
You like junk food.
Junk food.
Other day, my Korean doctor said, I was back to Korea, hadn't been back decades, and all the people are fat. And then he went on to say, and it's really hard to get people who have gotten ridiculously fat to get in shape because they don't like a decent diet. So if we've been raised on junk politics, we, even if we're kind of aware that it's junk politics, do a lot of junk politics because we know that people are expecting junk politics.
Mm-hmm.
It ain't easy to break out of the cycle.
Right.
And so I'm not surprised that politicians say, I'll promise you this, I'll promise you that. Well, you were talking about Z as opposed to X and Y that you wanted to hear me promise. Well, I'll promise you Z as well, right? So I think there's really a cycle. It's a harmful cycle, and I think we have to break through it. And I happen to be in a position where I can pretty much say what I think. And I'll tell you this, Marcus, you've been talking about how well people visiting your debates have been doing or not doing. We had our weekly scrum meeting today for the American Solidarity Party. We had the scrum meeting for the campaign. We have another meeting that I also went to. But in the morning of the scrum meeting, I said, all right, you want to hear the magic number? Would you like to hear the magic number? And they says, magic number? What magic number? And I said, the magic number is 250. And they said, why is that the magic number? I figure that's about how many votes we'll get, 250. And one of the fellows who's really serious broke into a laugh, and he says, no, I talked to 2 other people yesterday, and they're going to vote for you. So I said, all right, magic number has been upped. It's 252. On the other hand, I've had a chance to introduce the American Solidarity Party. I'm pretty confident, at least in theory, given only the leadership of the Los Angeles Times, I've been able to introduce the name of the party and its core ideas to probably 250,000 people. Now, having been a teacher for 40 years and having watched a whole lot of students, now notice the difference, Marcus. Having watched over 40 years, a whole lot of students go like this. And then another bunch of students go like this. I've had to motivate myself, right? And it motivated myself a lot is to say, at least they've heard it.
Right. Yeah, you're getting the word out. I mean, you are getting the word out.
Yep.
And you couldn't run in future elections if they didn't know about the party. So maybe you're not winning the battle, but you're setting up to win the war.
Yeah, and our presidential candidate, Brian Carroll from Visalia, even though in most places he was a write-in, during the presidential election, he got 43,000 votes.
Nice.
Which isn't half bad.
No, it's not. No, it's not. Especially, I think you need to.
If you're a write-in, you got to dig to do it, right?
Yeah, but when you can get over 10,000, you start to get 40. You're looking at 50, and I think the qualifications are around 200,000. So you're well on your way. That's basically proof of concept, as we call it. Meaning, yes, we can do this with only amateur volunteers and a little bit of shoestring budget cash. We can do this, and that's good because what they can do is you can now go to funders or other people and saying, imagine if we had real money. Imagine if we had some really good donations and 3 times the volunteer staff. You take whatever resources you have and you say that equals 40,000, and then you can extrapolate that and go. So if we multiplied these resources, it would be 80,000. If we tripled them, it'd be X number. And if we quintupled them, now we're looking at qualifications for the party. And you can actually.
All right. Marcus, that's the segue for one more Latin statement. I knew you were waiting for another one, at least another one.
That's a pretty good slam on Kamala. Yes, Professor.
Omne ens. Everything that is. Everything. Omne ens perficitur is perfected in actu, in action. Omne ens perficitur in actu. And that in Thomistic philosophy extends across the board. Anything that is realizes its potential in action. How about being a citizen? You're not going to realize it unless you're acting. People talk about political participation. Ultimately, why? Because you won't develop your potential as a human being unless you act to develop the community in which you live. And so you're talking about, yes, we can do it. We can get started. We can grow. You got to begin. So we're beginning.
Well, I agree. But we're going to keep the promise to keep a tight show. So jameshanink.com. You can look up Professor Hanink on his website or on his Facebook page, Professor Hanink for Governor. Professor, we're going to go to the big question now. You don't have to like it. You don't have to agree. We just want a dialogue. That's what Yes California is about. We think it's okay to have conversations about peaceful legal change in a democracy. Do you agree that it's okay to have conversations in a democracy about legal change?
Omne ens perficitur nactu. If we don't have conversations, we won't know what we're talking about. Unless we start to talk, we don't know what we're thinking.
Exactly. So the first question that we're going to have and is going to be this one. I'm going to post it up here. Let's see if you get it. California est gens.
Yes.
Your take.
It's a people.
Do you agree?
California is a people.
Do you agree?
Yes, I agree that California is a people. In fact, I'd say, given the root meaning of gens, I'd say California's maybe half a dozen people. Half a dozen peoples.
Okay. Well, that was supposed to be California is a nation. What do you think about the concept of California as its own country? Okay, not okay? Walk us through. What's your feelings? Any right.
Now I'm going to push at you, Marcus.
Go ahead.
What do I think about a concept? I think that the main thing the concept has to be is to be coherent. So if somebody asks me, what do I think about the concept of a square circle? I'm going to say there ain't no concept of a square circle. There are two words that you brought together.
Okay.
So a concept is a concept. What I'm interested in is a proposition, a statement that's either true or false.
Okay, how about this? California is a donor state. Recently, we had to raise the gas tax on ourselves, raising us to having the highest taxation level in all of America. The gas tax that was passed was only going to generate, I think, about $9 to $21 billion over 5 years. We lost over $21 billion each year, giving money through our federal income taxes to about 35 to 40 states. Now, these states are all reviewed by the federal government. The federal government reviews states every year and it releases reports. California has funding per pupil, per capita, equivalent to Mississippi and Alabama. We have some of the worst schools in America, some of the worst roads in all of America, some of the worst bridges. I think we have the most number of what's called fracture critical bridges in all of America, meaning one bad car crash, they collapse on everybody. The dam over the levee over Sacramento is as dangerous as the one over New Orleans and is projected to break with as much human calamity and loss. We received $0 federal dollars to fix that. We do not get I think we're about $540 billion below the amount we need to fix our roads. So we can't take over our schools, our dams, our airports, our levees, our buildings. We have the worst infrastructure in all of America, and yet we have to raise taxes on ourselves to cover basic things because we waste about $60 billion supporting 35 other states. This has gone on for 4 decades. Is that okay? As a Californian, is that a good thing for Californians for 40 years to raise taxes on ourselves, not be able to fund things on ourselves, and provide for 35 other states? Is that okay? Is that a good thing? That's a yes or no question.
Yes, it is a yes or no question, but every question has a context, and you certainly won't throw me off the show if I quote Aristotle to give you the principle by which I'm going to answer yes or no.
Sure.
Aristotle's principle is this: equals should be treated equally, and unequals unequally in proportion to their relevant differences. Now, is there some relevant difference between the need for roads in Mississippi and Kansas and California? I don't think so. Is there some relevant difference between the need for this crucial aspect of infrastructure in Massachusetts, Texas, and California? I don't think so. We all need certain basic elements of infrastructure. And if we're supporting other people in a way that's not equal, that should be remedied. That should be remedied. Now, it also should be studied. It might well be that if we were doing this show in Rhode Island would be making some interesting claims. And I don't purport to know the details on all of this, but the principle is treat equals equally and unequals unequally in proportion to their relevant differences. So now we got to talk about what counts as a relevant difference, right? Now, when it comes to something like provision for infrastructure, I don't see any relevant difference at all. We all need basic infrastructure. There's no reason for our paying for somebody else's basic infrastructure. They all ought to pay for infrastructure considerations equally.
Right. So it's not okay and it's not fair and it treats us unequally.
Given the empirical account that you provided.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. By the way, Arnold Schwarzenegger was the last governor to bring up how California is a donor state to the detriment of California. He was talking about $100 billion. You know what happened after he brought that up? The federal government for the previous 30 years before Governor Schwarzenegger brought up that we're a donor state had released an annual report. So every single year for about 30 years, the federal government released an annual report showing what states took in more and what states paid in more. And coincidentally, Congress decided to stop printing that report for the first time in 30 years, the year after Governor Schwarzenegger pointed out that we were a donor state. Isn't that an incredible chance coincidence, Professor? What do you think that means?
Well, I don't think it's a chance coincidence.
What?
As Aristotle said, and I can quote more recent philosophers, but that's a good philosopher to quote. As Aristotle said, for the most part, what people call chance is convergence of two independent causal chains. So you've got a certain causal chain, and let's say the causal chain is the Arnold Schwarzenegger chain that leads to it's being made public that California is, as you put it, a donor state. And then you got another causal chain, and that other causal chain is the ongoing publication of reports by the United States government, right? Now, somehow those two chains have crossed each other on your view, which might very well be historically accurate. So that's in a way chance, but it's not inexplicable. Two different causal chains. And then we could raise the question of why did these two chains converge the way they did converge? It could be because one of the chain makers knew what was going on in another chain and made sure that they converged.
Right. So you have California as a donor state for decades, before Schwarzenegger brings this up and after. But then you can look at the 1 year where Schwarzenegger brings it up. And then you have...
Yeah, for the sake of discussion, I'll grant you all of that. It's plausible.
Sure. What about the fact that the Supreme Court of America is now as conservative as it was about 45 years ago, and that they're already starting to strike down laws Californians care about? Recently, we saw them uphold the fact that it's okay to say that it's fine to racially profile Latino people, as Arizona did. They also said that corporations get to be money. They also said that California does not get to have the gun protection laws that we want. We are not allowed to protect ourselves from high-capacity magazines, which prevent mass shootings, although we suffered 2 of them. That was struck down recently. The court also said that women are not allowed to do class action lawsuits for sexism, and they're also starting to back different legislation. Is it okay that we here in California have a particular lifestyle? We pass laws to protect our lives in the way that we think is important, and then to have those laws struck down in a manner there's nothing to do. Is that a good thing for us to be part of that system, or should Californians be worried that the life that they've known for the last 40 years is systematically being deconstructed with the Supreme Court, the likes of which we haven't known since 1974?
All right. Now, you encourage pushback, right? I know
Please.
you do, secretly.
I do. Love it.
Some of my pushback is semantics. And people will say, you've heard this, oh, that's just semantics. And then I want to say, well, you know what semantics means? It means meaning. So if somebody says, oh, that's just semantics, what they're saying is, oh, that's just a question about what words mean. Well, yeah, it is a question about what words mean. All right, so now you use the word conservative. I think for the most part, not in every context, but for the most part, there goes the eye roll, for the most part.
I'm so over people explaining how I'm not a conservative Republican.
Okay. No.
Unique iteration that the voters really don't care much about.
I'm over the use of the word conservative, liberal, progressive.
Okay.
Right. When I call those words, for the most part, I call them thought blockers. Okay. If we could have more conversations in which we would discuss proposal X, Y, or Z without anybody saying it's conservative, it's liberal, it's progressive, it's reactionary, but just have the proposal without the labels, I think we'd make some progress. All right. Okay. Now, that said, I think that another term that you used that I'd like to contest, and I myself have used it from time to time. Lifestyle. I am perfectly okay with shoe style, hat style, dress style, style of font. But a human life is something too big to be just treated as a style. And I think instead of saying the word lifestyle, we would say something better if we said something like, the way we live here now in California with respect to these fundamental goods that we take to be necessary for our flourishing. And we could break it up. But if we break it up too much, then we'll be back to junk politics and junk language to talk junk politics.
Sure.
Now, going on to the court, I think that any state in the union that finds itself habitually at odds with findings of the Supreme Court should be asking itself why, should be challenging the court, should be sending a lot of its citizens to law school to see if they can't shift things in a better direction. But what doesn't follow, even from the first three questions you've asked me, it doesn't follow that that's enough to leave the union. It might, but it doesn't follow automatically. I would like to ask further questions, but I can see from the questions you've raised that you have some substantive reasons for wondering, why should we stick with this group?
Well, we like gun control here in California. Let me rephrase. A majority of Californians, in poll after poll and law after law for the last 45 years, have shown a greater enthusiasm for gun control than a majority of Americans in general. One of those things was making it so we can't have mass executions here in California because we've already dealt with those, like the Gilroy shooter. One of the things that we did to save our lives was say you don't get to have high capacity magazines here. And then the Supreme Court struck that down. So we have mass shootings. We don't like mass shootings. The majority of the voters are against machine guns and machine gun parts here in California. And the Supreme Court says, tough, I don't care. You don't get what you want, even though you think you need it to save lives. Is that okay? Is that a good thing for California to be in a system where stuff like that happens?
It's a bad ruling and a series of bad rulings by the Supreme Court. I certainly grant you that. And I think you're understating the case. We don't like it. We don't like random violence. We don't like mass murders. The reason why we don't like them is they're bad. They're bad for human beings. They're bad things. Now, whether or not we want to say, because of this, we're going to leave the union is another matter.
Sure.
The more things that you raise that put us in fundamental opposition to the union, more things you raise, the more questions are generated and the more reasonable your position becomes.
Citizens United. Most Californians are against corporations being people. The Supreme Court says that's law. Most Californians are against racial profiling. The Supreme Court said that the Arizona law where you can racially profile Latinos is okay. Most Californians are against Donald Trump's cap on refugees, and they saw it as xenophobic. The Supreme Court said that's okay. Most Californians thought that the Latino children in concentration camp conditions, where they were denied access to lawyers, showers, or reporters, equivalent to conditions in 1943 Warsaw, is not okay. The Supreme Court said that's okay. Those are 5 specific instances where Californians overwhelmingly do not think this is okay. And the Supreme Court said, tough, this is the law. You can't do anything about it. Many of these laws have been in place for 10 years or 5 years. So they're not really going to get changed. I mean, Citizens United is almost a decade old. It ain't going anywhere. The ruling on Arizona goes back to Obama. It's never going to get changed. So how many of our rights do we have stripped away? How many of the things that a majority of Californians have said are dear to us do we get struck down before we say, you know what? This isn't working for us?
I don't know. I imagine some people in New York are asking the same things of themselves.
Yeah, yeah,
Illinois are asking the same things of themselves. A bunch of people in Massachusetts are
fair
actually
enough.
thinking of
Fair enough.
themselves.
Okay, all right. How about this? If you were governor and there was a legal vote where the citizens of California were asked if you want to leave America, and over half of them said, let's say it was a definitive majority, a majority of them said, yes, we want to go. And it was a legal vote. And it was observed and it was legitimate. And there was no fake ballot boxes and legitimate. And you're governor.
Well, mail-in ballots, right?
No mail, whatever.
Oh, okay.
Do you think it's your job as governor to listen to the will of the people, given a fair vote? Or is it okay to say, no, I reject that, I don't want to leave, and I'm just going to not follow what the majority of the population says?
Oh, no, if the majority of the population voted that way, and I thought that there had been a real debate about it, of course I'd go along with it. Which gives me an opportunity to say something of nature of political philosophy. There is a view which the United States is committed to, as are all of the major nation states in the world. There is a view of sovereignty. And it's the idea that there's a absolute sovereignty and that each state is sovereign unto itself. Well, I don't accept that. The state is in service of the people. The people are not in the service of the state is in the service of the people. It's the people who are sovereign, not the state. But even the sovereignty of the people can be challenged. I want to read you a real short thing that connects with what we're talking about. This is from a wild-eyed radical called St. Augustine. And St. Augustine wrote in the middle 300s. And what was his context? The Roman Empire was falling apart fast. So here's Augustine. It's just a paragraph. If the people have a sense of moderation and responsibility, whoa, that's an if, isn't it? If the people have a sense of moderation and responsibility and are most careful guardians of the commonweal, it is right to enact a law allowing such a people to choose their own magistrates. Should we have democracy? Well, yeah, if we got good citizens. He continues. But if as time goes on, the same people become so corrupt as to sell their votes and entrust the government to scoundrels and criminals, then the right to appoint their public officials is rightly forfeit to such a people, and the choice devolves to a few good men. Now, why do I read that right now? Because the state isn't absolutely sovereign, and the people aren't absolutely sovereign. What's sovereign is right reason that's directing itself towards the development of the common good. And so forms of government are contingent. It depends. Are we realizing the common good or are we not? Now, the difficulty here, and I'm sure Augustine was aware of it, is finding the few good men who would take over if most of the citizens become corrupt. That's tricky. That's real tricky. And I think in the end, that's why we need more than ourselves to make any form of human life really human.
One of the things that I loved, here it is. So let me pull this up. And hopefully you can see this. Tell me if you can see this on the screen. So this is a quote from Thomas Jefferson. Let me blow it up so it's a lot bigger.
Oh, fur trade. That was before we understood that was cruel to animals. But go ahead. I mean,
Sure. Fur trade's horrible. Got it.
All right.
All bad. Can you see the quote though, Professor?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so in 1813, letter from Thomas Jefferson, who effectively designed America, to John Jacob Astor, congratulating Astor on the establishment of Fort Astoria, the coastal fur trade, the Pacific Fur Company, and described Astoria as the great gem of free independent empire on that side of our continent. So he's further went on in this writing saying, with gratification to the time when its descendants shall have spread themselves throughout the whole length of that coast, covering it with free and independent Americans, unconnected with us, but by the ties of blood and interest, and employing like us the rights of self-government. So that's Thomas Jefferson in 1813 saying, America should never own California. It would be too big. America would not work, and California should be an independent country. Thoughts, feelings?
Well, first thing I want to say is what I was saying before. The government doesn't somehow rule the people. The government is for the people, and that requires that the people be good people. And it could well be the case that if people are spread very thinly over a whole continent and don't have any kind of connection with each other, it's going to be very hard for them even to have a coherent government. But of course, one of the things we know about 1813 is there weren't even trains functioning at that time, much less cars or any electronic media, much less wonderful debates sponsored by the Yes California campaign. So we have much more of a one country, one world now than Jefferson could imagine. Nonetheless, it can't well be that a given country doesn't work. And there's a whole historical set of precedents. Let's take the most recent one. What's the newest country in the world right now? I bet you know.
Bougainville or it's the country that was formerly connected like Papua New Guinea or one of those South Sudan.
I think you're right, unless it's tied with South Sudan.
Yeah, it's one of those two.
Yeah, no, South Sudan had really nothing in common with Sudan. It really should be its own country, but it's desperately poor and it's going to need the help of other countries.
Yeah.
If somebody said, are you for South Sudan Brexit? I would say, yes, I am, and it's going to be really tough. Let's help them. And I think very often what's at issue when we talk about secession is what's the motive going on here? What's the motive going on here? I could see motives developing so that California would quite rightly want to leave the Union. But along with motive, there's also the question of method. And when you talked about a majority vote, that settled the method question there. And then there's also, we live in a fallen world. There's also the question of military. There's also the question of self-defense. One of the things that South Sudan is learning rapidly is, well, it might be a country, but not unless it can defend itself.
Let's talk about South Sudan. So part of the reason South Sudan became independent from Sudan, or the northern one, was I think Bashir was the dictator. He was from the more Arab side, and the southern part was more indigenous African American animist belief, and the north was more Arabic and Muslim, and they basically viewed themselves as superior and committed a quasi-genocide to basically push those people out with rebel fighters known as the Janjaweed. One of the interesting things is that I understand that it's much worse over there than here, of course, but I also understand that America's been effectively a country that's had elections for about 200 years. And in 2020, we saw something that had never, ever happened before, ever in the entire history of America. And that was that the Republican Party, one of the two major parties, there's always basically been two parties. You can go back to the Whigs, whatever. One of the two parties ran.
Whigs? Did you bring that up deliberately?
Yeah. No, I didn't.
Your dirty tricks, Marcus.
No. Here, look. Here. There you go. Now we're even. See, now I don't have one of the going back to the 1800s. The Republican Party, for the first time in 200 years, you had one of the two major parties say, our convention for all of our delegates around all of America is we don't want to be like California. So you can type in 2020 Republican National Convention. It was focused on don't be California. California is not America. It's an example of not Americans. There has never been a year ever in American history where a national party has said, our theme for this year is, see this one state, they suck and they're horrible and they're not us. That's never happened. Additionally, we can look at Texas Governor Abbott, Florida Governor DeSantis. We can look at the people running for governor in Nevada, and they've run on a don't turn our state into Californians. We've also seen Californians who've moved to places like Portland, Oregon, have their windows smashed and their car spray painted on saying, go back home. Does that sound like Americans loving fellow Americans, or does it seem a little bit like they think they're better than us and there's something wrong with us? What say you?
I think that a lot of people think that they're better than most Californians. I think that's so. Now, historically, let me offer this anecdote. Once upon a time, we had a president named John Adams, and then there came John Quincy Adams, and then there came Charles Adams, a nephew of John Quincy. And Charles tells a terrific story about how once he wanted to skip school and his mother sent for his uncle, John Quincy. John Quincy came up to his bedroom and said, "You are going to school," and led him to school. Well, at any rate, Charles Adams was a keen surveyor of the American scene. One of his great books, which was written over a period of at least 20 years, was called The Education of Charles Adams. Now, problem. He said, and I've got to back up 1 minute. It's Henry Adams, not Charles Adams. Charles was his dad. Got to back up, make that correction. Now, to my point, Henry Adams said, I've been in the Northeast all my life. And for some reason, I don't know why, the Irish don't like us. The Irish don't like us, and we can't figure that out. And we don't know why they don't like us and why they separate themselves from us. Well, of course, what he missed was that the Irish were habitually exploited. Cheap labor, no Irish need apply. And why I bring that example up is, if you look to American history, you will find a lot of cases where one whole group of Americans thought another whole group of Americans were to be barely tolerated. And now it's ironically California's turn, because I think a lot of us in California also look down on the rest of the country as tending to be yahoos of one stripe or another, and certainly not liberated. And we will free them. And how is it that we free them? And this is one of the reasons why I'm suspicious of the virtues of California. One of the ways that we free them is why the valley right here, the valley that we call the valley in Los Angeles, is the biggest producer of pornography in the world. And what we want to do is loosen everybody up. One of the things we're doing here in Los Angeles is in the state, treating sex workers as they deserve to be treated. Now, I think that California has its own distinctive vices. I mean, can you imagine somebody saying, well, we've been worried about our little brother George. We've been worried about him for a long time, but geez, now he's got a good paying, stable job as a sex worker.
I saw a skit on this, but I'm not going to share it. It's
at any rate,
no comment.
At any rate, there's that aspect of California too. There's that aspect.
Sure, but that's, I mean, you don't have to like that, but that's, I could see where Americans would be bothered by that, but I could also see the fact that you know, that's probably not going to change. I mean, the pornography industry, whether you hate it or not, it kind of developed here in California. It goes back here. I mean, the heydays in the 70s was here. And I could see how Americans may not like that. My only point was that these are a lot of states who don't like us for the things that we do, and we subsidize them. And then they
Okay.
appoint,
Because they don't like us doesn't mean that we have to subsidize them. It
but
doesn't
we
mean
do.
that
We
we
don't have
do.
a choice.
It doesn't mean that we can't work vigorously not to subsidize them. Now, whether we want to say, forget the Supreme Court, whether we want to say, forget the United States Congress and Senate, whether we want to say, forget the economy of the rest of the country, I don't know. It doesn't seem
Well,
to me that we're in a position to do that.
I don't think that California would cut off the economy of America, largely because there was a book called Global California, which looked at international trade in America over the last 120 years. Basically, you can go back to 1920. Every international trade deal that America did was sponsored or promoted by California. So the World Trade Organization, the first international trade links, the WTO, the admission of China, Glasnost. California has basically been the driving force for all of America's international trade linkages going back 100 years. So if we were independent, there's nothing there to suggest that we would not continue international trade relations with America, given that we can push them.
I didn't mean that we wouldn't continue international trade relations. I meant to say, do we want to really radically alter our trade relations with the rest of the United States by way of our seceding from the Union?
And I don't think that would happen, because NAFTA did a massive overhaul of all the trade regulations over the 50 states, more than anything America's seen in the last 40 years. And NAFTA was primarily pushed by California. So that international trade network overlapped and superseded a lot of the domestic laws. That's why they called it a big move. And they basically just re-ratified it. Both attempts by Clinton and under Trump were pushed by California. So if we're the ones pushing for international trade regulation that supersedes domestic law, why would we not stay part of that if we left?
Well, we could see.
Fair enough. I want to ask you about the military equation. A lot of people talk about the United States military. We need to be protected. But a lot of people are not aware of the fact that there's a country called North Korea, and they have nuclear missiles. And they love talking about how their nuclear missiles can hit America. And they even made a video showing how their missiles could blow up California. Now, when we go back 60 years, Californians have been against every single form of American militarism ever since. I mean, the anti-nuclear stockpiling movement was here. We were the most against Reagan's expansion of the military. We were the most against nuclear weapons. The Vietnam protest movement started here. 2/3 of all the Iraq protests were here. We're the most anti-military adventure place anywhere in America going back to the 1970s. Yet, America likes going and picking on countries or picking fights or telling North Korea, your rockets are weak and ours are bigger. And then North Korea gets mad and they threaten to blow up California. And then America decides, hey, we need to invade the Middle East. And we have a president called George W. Bush who says, let's launch a crusade, while launching an invasion of 1/5 of the global human population. Good move. And one of the worst terrorist attacks after 9/11 occurred here in California. It was the San Bernardino shooting, where I believe some ISIS terrorists came in and they just machine gunned down a bunch of people. So we don't like starting confrontation. America does. And then those countries threaten to blow us up, not because they're mad at us, but because they want to retaliate against America, when America did the exact opposite of what we said. And same thing on the war on terror. We're now a major target for terror. One of the worst terror targets was here. Michael Chertoff, the director of Homeland Security, said the place most vulnerable to terror attack after 9/11 was California. Not Nebraska, not Wyoming. So how good a deal is it? How safe are we being under the American military wing when America likes to go pick fights, start fights, and then those people get mad and we're the easiest part of America to attack, and then we do get attacked and killed? Does that seem like a good plan for national security for us?
Well, let's think about North Korea. You covered, as you usually do, a range of questions, but let's focus on North Korea. Uh, I think were we to secede, uh, North Korea, even if they thought very highly of us, which would be reason to be suspicious of them, they wouldn't have any hesitancy if they're going to use nuclear weapons, directing them to Oregon. In which case, were they to succeed in doing that, we in California would suffer tens of millions of deaths. And I don't think they'd have any hesitation to using them against Arizona. And the results would be the same. In one respect, the hideous militarism that we experience today makes us closer together, no matter how much we'd like to pull apart, because we're all vulnerable to the incredible lethal force of nuclear weapons and the nuclear winter that would follow them. So I don't think that the North Korean threat argument puts us really in that special a position. Now, with respect to militarism, uh, I'm a child of the 60s. As you can see, I'm no longer a child. But one of my favorite lines from the 60s is from, I think it's Buffy St. Marie, actually, if you remember her. It was a song called The Universal Soldier. And what she said in The Universal Soldier was, you want wars to end, stop participating in them. And you know, of course, the line, what if they gave a war and nobody came? What I think we on California ought to do, and I would be more sympathetic to Brexit if in fact we did this, is to have mass refusal to participate in any kind of military system, which at its base depends on the use of nuclear weapons and the use of other weapons of mass destruction. What I would like to see is a state full of war resistors. In a state full of war resistors, and in a state where the elderly were respected and unborn babies weren't killed. My God, in our state, we don't even bother to report the number of abortions that's so accepted. Were the state like that, I would think that maybe it is time for us to set a special witness to the rest of the country by setting up a country that's pro-life for the whole of life.
So if we were a pacifist country, that might be a good reason to become.
Well, there's pacifism and there's pacifism. I don't believe that there's something wrong with self-defense, understood as the use of the minimal force necessary to stop an unjust aggressor. Suppose I came at you like this, knowing karate the way I do, trying to steal your necktie. I think you could defend yourself, but that has nothing to do with contemporary warfare, nothing to do at all. And there are uncanny parallels, kind of a flip parallel. We've had, and when the usual suspects, and by the usual suspects, I mean Biden, who will be here in 2 days, Obama, Harris, Klobuchar, when the usual suspects come to town, here's what I think about them as usual suspects. Number one, they all think, as do Republican usual suspects, they all think that the United States of America is the greatest country in the world. They all think that. And I suspect if California broke away, it might well think it's the greatest country in the world. But none of them have a defensible standard of what counts as great. The greatest country in the world could be, for all I know, Costa Rica. The greatest country in the world is a country that has the most virtuous citizens. And there's no reason to think that that's the case with the United States, and certainly no reason to think that it's the case with California. That's the greatest country in the world, the country that has the most virtuous citizens. And politics, as it is today, ignores that. Now, the other thing they think, the usual suspects, we've had 65 million abortions, and I don't think in public any of the usual suspects have ever shed a tear. I think they think that, well, my goodness, oh, well. Now, as we were saying, let's look to the economy. And none of the usual suspects will say what Pope Francis says. It's wrong even to have nuclear weapons. They won't say that. And that's why I dismiss the Democratic Party as really a party of death. And I have grave doubts about the Republican Party, and I have high hopes for the American Solidarity Party.
I'm going to ask you one last question, but I do want to point out, though, that there are countries that are not threatened with being blown up, and there are countries that aren't major targets for terrorism. And they were countries that very clearly steered way far away from America's adventures. So we know for a fact that certain nations can distance themselves from America, and that it does have real trackable results where they are not threatened with being blown up and they are not declared terrorist targets. Whereas here in California, we have had the worst terrorist targets, and we have had the most direct threats of being blown up. And it is always because right after America says something.
Yeah.
But the question for
that's a good point. Good point.
The question for you is, if 35 states really didn't like California, and they said, 35 states really didn't like California.
What if we're only 34?
34.
All right.
34 states. 34 states say, you know what? We are sick and tired. You are so pro-immigrant. You have too many undocumented. You let Latin people walk around speaking Spanish. You let dudes hold hands. You let your women, be super opinionated. You're always talking about climate change. We're just sick and tired of it.
I would say to those states, I would say, nunca contaban con nuestra astucia.
Well, that would be
appropriate, right? That would be appropriate.
Yeah, sure, but it's if 35. Do you think that there's enough states there that don't like us that they might be theoretically willing to let us go? That we are unpopular enough? No. Not there. So when Texas says
for economic reasons, the country is run by economism, and for economic reasons, they let us go. You've pointed out economic advantage.
Sure. But when the Republican Party has their national convention and everybody loves it, and it's talking about California's bad, and when Florida, Texas, Nevada, and Oregon have governor candidates or governors run on California's bad, there's nothing there at all suggesting maybe some of these states don't like us?
Oh, no, I would think that a good many of them aren't too keen on us. And of course, we're not too keen on them. And unless there's a fundamental unity among the citizens of any state, the state will collapse.
Right.
But if it happens in the United States, don't be surprised if it then happens in California.
Well, I don't want the collapse of America, and I don't think that California leaving would really cause the dissolution of America simply because
I don't think it would either. What I'm saying is that whenever there's an absence of what I would call, following Aristotle, civic friendship, then there's an impossibility of maintaining the state. Every human enterprise calls for specific virtues. Your enterprise, Marcus, calls for truth-telling in a special way. Your enterprise, Marcus, calls for openness to varying opinions in a special way. In order for any community to be a real community, as opposed to a collection of disparate warring elements, there has to be a shared civic friendship. People in the state hate the people in that state, look for a dissolution. But it keeps going. Fragmentation. You know what you want to avoid, of course, and I know you want to avoid this. You want to avoid balkanization.
Absolutely.
Let's split up into so many states that everybody in any given state is a cousin of everybody else in that state.
Yeah. And, a lot of people look at Yugoslavia. They look at the Soviet Union and the breakup there. But I think part of that story is that those places already had defined periods of being a state. So all of the countries that broke up from Yugoslavia were nations before Yugoslavia for a long period of time, knew they had the history, and they had national flags, and there were still grandpas walking around. Remember the time where they were the Republic of whatever. And nobody in America has that. There's nobody who was alive when Texas was independent or Vermont was independent. We're not even 3 generations near that, whereas the Yugoslav people were. We can also look at the same thing with the breakaway countries in Russia. Same thing. They were conquered early 1900s. They broke up 1990s. That's not long enough for people to not remember when we were separate Estonia or Latvia. We don't have that memory of a distinct period or connection to it. The other thing is that it costs money to be a good country, and Americans are spoiled. So
politicians tell us that, don't they?
Sure.
No, we never do, because we have junk politics. We don't tell them they're spoiled. We tell them that they deserve everything they have, and we ought to give them more. And please tell them what it is.
Right. So when you have South Sudan and they're facing genocide, and they go, yeah, but you'll be poor. And they're like, well, we're already poor. Right. Yeah, we're going to be more poor, but we're already pretty poor, and we're getting wiped out. So it makes sense to leave. You go to America and you say, hey, Ohio, hey, Tennessee, California took off. You can have freedom too. Yeah, you'll have the living standards of Congo, but freedom. I don't think many Americans would say, I want to live in a third world setting just so I could be free. I think Americans are so used to a first world standard of living, and it takes money to provide that. And 35 to 45 states simply do not have the ability to economically provide that for themselves. And when you tell them, hey, Tennessee, you notice how everybody in West Virginia doesn't have a full set of teeth, and they have the highest diabetes rankings and the highest pregnancy rankings and the worst education level? That could be you with secession. I just don't see 45 states taking that. With California, we know that if we were independent, we automatically get richer. Like, we're losing money. So day one, the quality of life and money goes up. There's 45 states who cannot say that. Things get poorer. They can't afford everything. Standard of living drops dramatically. I don't see many Americans saying, good deal. So I think, if there was an active genocide, sure. But short of that, so I think if California leaves, it just doesn't make much sense for many other states to try to pursue it too. They cannot survive in a first world standard of living if they even attempt to.
Well, let's talk about Connecticut. Let's talk about New York. Let's talk about Florida. Let's talk about Illinois. Let's talk about Texas, which was its own country once upon a time.
Texas could survive. New York City could.
Now,
Illinois could not.
With you. I got to share an anecdote with you. You're going to like this.
Sure.
I'm from Michigan, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Okay. There are people who think that Ann Arbor is the Athens of the Midwest. Wrong. It's Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Okay.
If you're in Michigan, from time to time the question arises, what should you call yourself? There's a whole group that call themselves Michiganians. I prefer Michigander. Now, getting to my point. When I'm outside of Michigan and people ask me, what does Michigan look like?
The hand.
I always say,
yeah.
This, Upper Peninsula.
Yeah. Oh, the Yoopers.
Upper Peninsula.
The Yoopers.
Well, that's not what they call themselves. They call themselves the UPers.
My roommate lived in Michigan right next to the border. And he said we were called, you call them Yoopers?
Yeah.
And call everybody South Trolls.
No, they're called the UPers.
That's what I was told. I have no opinions.
What's the origin of the Upper Peninsula? I'm getting to the point here, Marcus.
It's indigenous, isn't it? Primarily indigenous.
Before there was a U.S. of A., there were some independent territories, a bunch of them. And one was the Michigan Territory, and the other one was the Ohio Territory. And the Michigan Territory lost a war to the Ohio Territory.
Right.
And as compensation, Michigan got this diddly UP thing.
Yeah.
So why did I bring that up? For fun, but also because there are a lot of places that would say, well, we were independent once upon a time before.
Fair enough. But my point was, do they have the psychological connection the way that the people of the former Yugoslavia and Soviet Union did, where you had them coalesced in the 20s and then dissolved in the 60s, and literally there were people who were alive in the previous period in this country that disillusioned, or they were talking about, it was my dad who just passed away. In America, we're looking at nobody lived through the time when any of these places were independent. Nobody is even 1 or 2 generations. I just think psychologically that's very not like what happened in the Yugoslav and the former Soviet Union. When people have an emotional connection, a visceral, I was there. My dad was there. I mean, if you talk to Jewish people today and they have a parent who survived the Holocaust, they get PTSD from that. Now, imagine if you're like, yeah, I heard the Holocaust was bad. My grandpa 100 years ago dealt with it. I've never even met anybody who was even there. It just doesn't have the same impact.
Yep. No, I follow you. I think 2 interesting test cases that bring us closer to California today would be closer to home, Quebec, and very definitely Catalonia.
Love that.
Once pretty much was an independent country, and the Catalan people even have their own language.
Yep.
So there are all these test cases, and what I would say, and I think I agree with you, I think you agree with me.
Yeah.
No state can keep its own people prisoners. No state can say, you're here, period. Don't you dare try to leave. This is a Catholic social teaching. There is a right to emigration. There is a right to emigration. The state doesn't own us.
I know what that word means, and I agree.
Yeah. Well, now we're past time.
We're past time. We'll end it here.
And can I leave you with one last thought?
Anything, Professor.
All right, one last thought. One of my great heroes is a fellow named G.K. Chesterton. And one of the things, many things that Chesterton did was to develop what's called distributism. And what it really amounts to is my view of economic democracy, the widest possible range of ownership. And he was engaged in lots and lots of debates. And one of the things they said about Chesterton is no matter who he was debating with, he could look upon them as something of a friend. Now, one of the things that Chesterton said, I cherish, and it was in the form of a question. Why is it that angels can fly? Why is it that angels can fly? And his answer was, because they take themselves so very lightly. So if after a frank and candid exchange like this, we can take ourselves lightly, blimey, mate, we could fly.
What's the only tree that knows Kung Fu?
Oh, I don't know.
Spruce Lee.
Wow.
I loved that joke as a kid. I thought that was so great. So
that's a good one. Spruce Lee. That's a good one. All right.
Okay. We'll end it there.
Sayonara.
Sayonara. Adios. And we will see you soon, Professor.
Copy that. Godspeed.